Last time we began Edna's heartbreaking story. Today the second episode continues from where we stopped. 3 months in exchange for Grace's future security. 3 months and then he would face justice. But could Edna really allow her mother's killer to play father to her daughter, even for 3 months? Could she live with herself if she said yes? Edna spent sleepless nights wrestling with this decision. On one hand she thought about her mother. Patricia, who never got justice. Patricia, whose killer was walking free while she lay in a grave. Every fiber of Edna's being screamed for revenge. She wanted Mark to suffer. She wanted him to pay for what he did. She wanted him behind bars, rotting in a cell, thinking about Patricia's face and Edna's pain every single day. She imagined calling the police right now. Watching them handcuff Mark. Testifying in court. Seeing him sentenced to life in prison or better yet, death row. That image gave her a grim satisfaction. But then she thought about Grace. Grace, who was innocent in all of this. Grace, who had no idea that her existence was born from violence. Grace, who deserved every opportunity in life. Edna was a single mother working 2 jobs, just like her own mother had done. She was barely making ends meet. There were times when she couldn't afford Grace's school supplies. Times when they ate rice and beans for dinner 3 nights in a row because that's all they could afford. Mark was offering Grace a way out. Money for education. A life insurance policy. Security. But at what cost? At what cost to Edna's soul? At what cost to her mother's memory? Edna decided to talk to people she trusted. First she went to her pastor. She explained the situation, leaving out some of the most painful details. The pastor, an old man who had known Patricia, listened carefully. Then he said, "Forgiveness is the Lord's greatest commandment. But forgiveness doesn't mean allowing evil to go unpunished. You can forgive Mark in your heart while still demanding justice for your mother." That helped. A little. Next, Edna talked to her therapist. The therapist was more practical. "This isn't about Mark," the therapist said. "This is about you and Grace. What decision will allow you to sleep at night? What decision will you be able to explain to Grace when she's older and asks questions?" That was the key question. How would Edna explain this to Grace someday? Finally, Edna talked to her best friend, Chioma, who had been with her through everything. Chioma was blunt. "That man is a demon, Edna. I don't care if he's dying. I don't care if he found God. He killed your mother and raped you. There is no forgiveness for that. Call the police right now." But then Chioma paused. "But if you're asking me what's best for Grace, I don't know. I honestly don't know." Nobody could make this decision for Edna. The weight of this choice rested entirely on her shoulders. And time was running out. After 2 weeks of agonizing deliberation, Edna finally made her decision. She wrote Mark a letter and left it where he had been leaving his gifts. The letter said, "Mark, I will never forgive you for what you did. Never. You took my mother from me. You violated me in the worst possible way. You are a monster and nothing you do in these last months of your life will change that. But I am not making this decision for you. I am making it for Grace. You can meet Grace. You can be in her life. But under strict conditions. Number 1, you will never tell her you are her father. As far as she knows, you are a family friend who wants to help us. Number 2, you will set up a trust fund for her education and future. All legal documents will be prepared by my lawyer. Number 3, after 3 months you will turn yourself in to the police. You will confess to everything. You will not fight the charges. You will accept whatever sentence you receive. Number 4, you will never contact Grace again after those 3 months. You will not write her letters from prison. You will not try to have a relationship with her. You will disappear from her life completely. If you break any of these conditions even once, I will call the police immediately and tell them everything. This is not forgiveness. This is not mercy. This is me trying to do what's best for my daughter." Mark agreed to all of Edna's conditions. And so began the strangest, most painful 3 months of Edna's life. Mark became Uncle Mark to Grace. He visited twice a week, always under Edna's watchful supervision. Watching them together was torture for Edna. Grace took to Mark immediately. He brought her gifts, played games with her, read her stories. He was gentle with her. Patient. Kind. And Grace, sweet innocent Grace, had no idea she was playing with her grandmother's killer. Mark set up the trust fund as promised. He put in more money than Edna had expected. Apparently he had been saving for years, preparing for this moment. He also paid for Grace to attend a better school. He bought her new clothes, new toys, new books. He made sure Edna's rent was paid for the next year. On the surface he was doing everything right. But Edna watched him like a hawk. She never left him alone with Grace. She monitored every conversation. And every time Grace laughed at one of Mark's jokes or hugged him goodbye, Edna felt like she was betraying her mother's memory. At night, Edna would lie awake, questioning her decision. Was she doing the right thing? Or was she selling out her mother's legacy for money? And then, 6 weeks into their agreement, Mark did something that changed everything again. Mark asked Edna if they could talk privately while Grace was at school. Edna agreed, though she kept her phone in her hand, ready to call the police if needed. "I need to tell you something," Mark said, and he looked worse than before. The cancer was clearly progressing. He had lost weight. His skin looked gray. "What?" Edna asked coldly. "I lied," Mark said. Edna's heart stopped. "About what?" "About turning myself in after 3 months," Mark said. "I can't do it." Edna stood up, her phone already unlocking. "You promised. You gave me your word." Wait. Mark held up his hands. "Let me explain. I can't turn myself in after 3 months because I don't have 3 months. The doctors told me yesterday. I have maybe a month left. 6 weeks at most." Edna sat back down, not sure what to feel. "I'm going to die before the 3 months are up," Mark continued. "So I need to turn myself in now. Or the confession won't matter. You need to call the police today. Tomorrow at the latest." Edna stared at him. "You are asking me to send you to prison when you're dying?" "I'm asking you to get justice for your mother," Mark said. "Even if I only spend a few weeks in prison before I die, that's still justice. That's still accountability." For the first time since Mark had returned to her life, Edna saw something in his eyes that looked like genuine remorse. And it shook her. "I don't understand you," Edna said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand why you came back. Why you did all of this. Why you're making this even harder than it already was." "Because I'm trying to die as a human being instead of a monster," Mark said simply. "I know I don't deserve redemption. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted to do at least one good thing before I meet my judgment. And now I need to face earthly judgment too." Edna looked at this dying man in front of her. 5 years ago he had been strong, violent, full of rage. Now he was frail, broken, and seemingly filled with regret. But did regret undo murder? Did remorse bring her mother back? Did dying of cancer somehow balance the scales of justice? "I need time to think," Edna said. "You don't have much time," Mark said. "Call the police today. Please. Let me confess while I still can. Let me give your mother's case closure. Let me give you closure." After Mark left, Edna sat in her apartment staring at her phone. All she had to do was dial 3 numbers. 911. And the police would come. They would arrest Mark. He would confess. Justice would finally be served. But Edna found herself hesitating. Because she realized something she hadn't expected. She wasn't sure what justice looked like anymore. What is justice when the criminal is already dying? What is justice when the criminal has genuinely changed? What is justice when it might hurt your daughter? These were the questions Edna grappled with as she held her phone. If she called the police, Mark would be arrested. He would die in prison, probably within weeks. There would be a trial or at least news coverage. Grace would find out eventually. She would learn that Uncle Mark, the kind man who bought her toys and read her stories, was actually her father. And her grandmother's killer. And the man who raped her mother. How does a child process that information? On the other hand, if Edna didn't call the police, Mark would die quietly. The case would remain cold. Grace would never have to know the truth. But Patricia would never get justice. And Edna would have to live with the knowledge that she let her mother's killer go free. Neither option was good. Neither option felt right. Edna thought about what her mother would want. Patricia had always been compassionate. She had always believed in second chances. But surely even she would draw the line at murder. Or would she? Edna realized she needed to talk to the one person whose opinion mattered most. Grace. That evening, after Grace came home from school, Edna sat her daughter down. "Grace, baby, I need to ask you something." "Okay, Mommy." "Do you like Uncle Mark?" Grace's face lit up. "Yes. He's so nice. He tells the best stories." Edna's heart clenched. What if Uncle Mark had to go away? Would you be sad? Grace thought about it. Where would he go? Just away. For a long time. Will he come back? No, baby. He wouldn't come back. Grace's lower lip trembled. Then yes, I would be very sad. I would miss him. Why does he have to go away? Edna pulled Grace into her arms. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, baby. And sometimes people we care about have to leave. But I don't want him to leave, Grace said, starting to cry. He's our friend. Our friend. Grace had called Mark their friend. If only she knew the truth. That night, after Grace fell asleep, Edna made her decision. She picked up her phone and made a call. But it wasn't to the police. At least not yet. Edna called Mark and told him to come to her apartment the next morning. When he arrived, looking weaker than ever, Edna handed him a piece of paper. What's this? Mark asked. A full written confession, Edna said. You're going to write down everything that happened that night. Every detail. You're going to sign it, date it, and I'm going to keep it. And then? Mark asked. And then I'm going to decide what to do with it, Edna said. Maybe I'll give it to the police tomorrow. Maybe I'll give it to them after you die. Maybe I'll keep it until Grace is old enough to decide for herself what justice looks like. I don't know yet. You're not calling the police today? Mark asked, looking confused. I don't know what I'm doing, Edna admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know if I'm being merciful or if I'm being a coward. I don't know if I'm honoring my mother or betraying her. I don't know anything anymore. Mark sat down and began to write. And what he wrote would haunt Edna for years to come. Mark's confession was detailed. Painfully detailed. He wrote about planning the robbery. About choosing Edna's house because it looked easy to break into. About not planning to hurt anyone. He wrote about Patricia trying to protect Edna. About his anger when he realized there was no money. About the gun going off, though he admitted it wasn't an accident. He had meant to shoot her. He had wanted to make a point. He wrote about seeing Edna's terror and feeling nothing. No empathy. No remorse. Just cold calculation. He wrote about the rape. About how he had dehumanized Edna in his mind to make it easier. About how he left that house feeling powerful. And then he wrote about the years after. About the nightmares. About the slow, painful realization of what he had done. About the guilt that ate away at him until he couldn't function. He wrote about finding out he had cancer and seeing it as divine punishment. About trying to find Edna to make amends, even though he knew no amends could ever be enough. When he finished, he signed the confession and handed it to Edna. Do whatever you think is right, he told her. I trust your judgment more than my own. Edna took the confession and locked it away. And then she did something that surprised even herself. You can keep seeing Grace, Edna said quietly. Until you die. But I'm adding one more condition. Anything, Mark said. You're going to tell me about that night. About what you were thinking. About who you were. Because I need to understand. I need to understand how someone becomes capable of what you did. And so, for the remaining weeks of Mark's life, he and Edna had the most painful conversations imaginable. He told her about his own childhood, abusive, violent, filled with neglect. He told her about how he learned to survive by becoming hard, by shutting off his emotions. He told her about his first crime, his first act of violence, and how each one after that became easier. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me, Mark said during one of these conversations. I'm just trying to answer your question. How does someone become a monster? One choice at a time. One moral compromise at a time. Until you wake up one day and realize you don't recognize yourself anymore. Edna listened. She didn't forgive. But she began to understand that hurt people. And that knowledge was both heartbreaking and terrifying. As Mark's health deteriorated, Edna found herself in the strangest position, caring for the man who had destroyed her life. Mark became too sick to visit. So Edna made a decision that shocked her best friend Chioma. She allowed him to video call with Grace. Have you lost your mind? Chioma asked when she found out. He's dying. Good. Let him die alone. But Edna had her reasons. Grace loves him, she said simply. And he's kept every promise he made. The trust fund is set up. Her future is secure. And he's dying, Chioma. He's already being punished. Not enough, Chioma muttered. It will never be enough. And Edna agreed. It would never be enough. But she thought about her mother. About Patricia's kindness. About how she always said, "Hurt people need healing, not more hurt." During one video call, Grace asked Mark, "Uncle Mark, are you going to die?" Mark, looking skeletal now, managed a weak smile. "Yes, sweetheart. I am." "Will it hurt?" Grace asked innocently. "No," Mark lied. "I'll just go to sleep and wake up in a better place." "Will you see my grandma there?" Grace asked. "Mommy says grandma is in heaven." Edna, watching this conversation, froze. Grace had never met Patricia, but she knew about her. Mark's eyes filled with tears. He looked at Edna, silently asking permission to answer. Edna nodded, not trusting her voice. "Yes," Mark said to Grace. "I think I will see your grandma. And I'm going to tell her how special you are. How smart and kind and beautiful you are." What Mark didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that he would also be asking Patricia for forgiveness. A forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. Mark died 3 weeks later. He spent his final hours in a hospice with Edna by his bedside. She didn't go because she cared about him. She went because she needed to see it end. She needed to know that this chapter of her life was finally closing. As Mark lay dying, struggling for each breath, he looked at Edna with pleading eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Edna said nothing. She couldn't bring herself to offer comfort, but she also couldn't bring herself to leave. "Take care of Grace," Mark managed to say. "I always have," Edna replied. "I always will." "The confession," Mark began. "I know," Edna said. "I have it. Use it however you want. Justice however you define it." And then with one final shuddering breath, Mark died. Edna sat there for a long moment looking at his lifeless body. The man who had murdered her mother. The man who had raped her. The man who had fathered her child. He was gone. And Edna felt empty. Not relieved. Not vindicated. Just empty. But Edna's story wasn't over. Because now she had to decide. What would she do with Mark's confession? Edna didn't tell Grace that Uncle Mark had died right away. She needed time to process it herself first. She sat in her apartment holding Mark's written confession and thought about her options. Option 1. She could give the confession to the police. The case would be officially closed. Patricia would, in some sense, get justice. But there would be news stories. Grace would find out the truth. The whole neighborhood would know what happened. Option 2. She could destroy the confession. Let Mark's secrets die with him. Protect Grace from ever knowing the horrible truth about her conception. But live with the guilt of letting her mother's killer escape justice. Option 3. She could keep the confession locked away until Grace was old enough to decide for herself what justice should look like. Each option had consequences. Each option felt both right and wrong simultaneously. Edna called her pastor again. She called her therapist. He called Chioma. Everyone had different advice. The pastor said, "Justice delayed is not justice denied. Do what brings you peace." The therapist said, "You've been carrying this trauma for 5 years. Maybe it's time to let it go, whatever that means for you." Chioma said, "Give the confession to the police. Your mother deserves to be more than a cold case file." In the end, Edna made a choice that no one expected. Not even herself. Edna decided to give the confession to the police. But with specific instructions. She went to the police station with Mark's confession and a letter of her own. In her letter, she explained that the suspect had died, but she wanted the case officially closed. She wanted it on record that Patricia's murder had been solved. She wanted her mother's name to be more than just another unsolved case. However, she requested that the police keep the details confidential. No press releases. No public announcements. Just a quiet closing of the case. The detective who took her statement was an older woman who looked at Edna with deep compassion. "I understand," the detective said. "I have a daughter myself. I can't imagine what you've been through. Can you really keep this quiet?" Edna asked. "I don't want my daughter to find out about this from a news story or a nosy neighbor." The detective nodded. "I'll do everything in my power to protect your family's privacy. Your mother will get justice, but we'll do it as quietly as possible." Edna handed over the confession. As she watched the detective read it, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Not completely gone, the trauma would never fully leave her, but lighter. When Edna got home that day, she finally told Grace about Uncle Mark's death. And Grace's reaction broke her heart all over again. Uncle Mark went to heaven, Edna told Grace gently, holding her daughter close. Grace cried. Real, heartbroken tears. But he said he would teach me to ride a bike. He promised. I know, baby. I know. Why did he have to die? Grace sobbed. Why do people I love always die? Edna realized Grace was thinking of Patricia too, the grandmother she had never met but always heard about. Sometimes people die before we're ready to say goodbye, Edna said, choosing her words carefully. But that doesn't mean they didn't love us. Uncle Mark loved you very much. It wasn't a lie. Despite everything, despite the violence, despite the evil Mark had done, Edna believed he had genuinely loved Grace. In his own broken, damaged way, he had loved his daughter. Will I forget him? Grace asked. Edna thought about that. Part of her wanted to say yes, wanted to erase Mark from Grace's memory. But she knew that wasn't realistic. You'll remember the good things, Edna said. You'll remember the stories he told you. The games you played together. The way he made you laugh. What Grace wouldn't know, what Edna hoped she would never know, was the rest of Mark's story. The violence. The rape. The murder. But secrets have a way of coming out. And Edna would soon learn that protecting Grace from the truth was going to be harder than she thought. As Grace got older, she started asking questions. Mommy, why don't I have a daddy? Mommy, why do I look different from you? Mommy, did you know my daddy? Edna had prepared answers for these questions. Vague answers that were technically true but didn't reveal the whole horror. Your daddy isn't in our lives, she would say. You look like your daddy's side of the family, she would explain. It's complicated, baby. I'll explain when you're older. But the questions kept coming. And Edna knew that someday, probably soon, she would have to tell Grace something closer to the truth. She talked to her therapist about this. How do you tell your daughter she was conceived through rape? How do you tell her that her father murdered her grandmother? The therapist didn't have easy answers. You tell her age appropriately. You tell her as much as she can handle at each stage of her development. And you make sure she knows that none of it is her fault. That she is loved. That she is wanted. Edna tried to hold on to that. Grace was loved. Grace was wanted. Despite everything, despite the trauma and the pain and the impossible circumstances, Edna loved her daughter fiercely. And then on Grace's 8th birthday, something happened that forced Edna's hand. One of Grace's classmates, whose parent was a police officer, mentioned at the birthday party that Grace's dad had died in hospice. Grace, confused, asked Edna about it later. Mommy, Taiwo said my dad died. But I thought my dad just wasn't around. Was Taiwo talking about Uncle Mark? Edna's blood ran cold. How did Taiwo's parent know? Had the police leaked information despite their promise? Where did Taiwo hear that? Edna asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Her mom is a police officer, Grace said. She said she saw it in a file. Edna was furious. She had specifically requested confidentiality. But somehow the information had gotten out. She couldn't lie to Grace anymore. The questions would only increase. And if she wasn't the one to tell Grace the truth, someone else would, and their version might be even more traumatic. That night, after the party guests had gone home and Grace was getting ready for bed, Edna sat her daughter down. Grace, baby, there's something I need to tell you. And it's going to be hard to hear. Grace looked frightened. What is it, Mommy? Uncle Mark, he was your father. Grace's eyes widened. Really? But why didn't you tell me? Because it's complicated, Edna said. Uncle Mark did something very bad before you were born. Something that hurt a lot of people. What did he do? Grace asked. And Edna realized she was at a crossroads. How much should she tell? How much could an 8-year-old handle? Edna made a decision to tell Grace a version of the truth, one that was honest but age-appropriate. Your father made some very bad choices, Edna said carefully. He hurt people. And because of those choices he couldn't be in your life the way a normal daddy would be. Did he hurt you? Grace asked, her young face full of concern. Edna's eyes filled with tears. Yes, baby. He did. Is that why you're sad sometimes? Grace asked. When you think I'm not looking? Children see more than we think. Grace had noticed her mother's pain even when Edna tried to hide it. Yes, Edna admitted. Your father hurt me very much. But I want you to know something important. None of that is your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. You are good and kind and wonderful. And I love you more than anything in this world. Grace was quiet for a moment, processing. Did my dad, did he love me? Edna thought about Mark's final days. His desperate desire to know Grace. His tears when he talked about her. Yes, Edna said honestly. In his own way he loved you very much. Even though he did bad things? Grace asked. People are complicated, Edna said. Sometimes people who do bad things can still feel love. It doesn't excuse what they did. But yes, I believe he loved you. Grace thought about this for a long time. And then she asked the question Edna had been dreading most. Mommy, what happened to Grandma Patricia? The one in the pictures. Edna took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been avoiding for 8 years. Your grandmother died before you were born, Edna said slowly. How? Grace asked. Edna had to decide right now how much to reveal. Should she tell Grace that her father killed her grandmother? Should she burden an 8-year-old with that knowledge? She decided on another partial truth. She died in a robbery, Edna said. Bad men came to our house and they killed her. The same time my dad hurt you? Grace asked, putting pieces together with the frightening intelligence of children. Edna nodded, unable to speak. Grace was quiet. Then she asked, was my dad one of the bad men? Edna closed her eyes. There was no point in lying anymore. Grace was too smart. She would figure it out eventually. Yes, Edna whispered. Grace started to cry. My dad killed Grandma? My dad killed your mommy? Edna pulled Grace into her arms. Baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you have to know this. But I need you to understand something. You are not your father. You are not responsible for what he did. You are your own person and you are good. But Grace couldn't stop crying. Everyone at school has normal families. Normal daddies who take them to the park and teach them things. Why couldn't I have that? Why did my dad have to be bad? Edna had no answer to that. Because life isn't fair. Trauma doesn't discriminate. And sometimes children bear the consequences of adult sins. The weeks after that conversation were difficult. Grace became withdrawn. She stopped talking about her father. She stopped asking questions. Edna enrolled her in therapy. The therapist worked with Grace to process the information in a healthy way. It's normal for children to struggle with this kind of revelation, the therapist told Edna. She's grappling with questions of identity, morality, and family. It will take time. Grace's school performance dropped. She had nightmares. She started asking Edna if she was bad because her father was bad. No, baby, Edna would tell her every time. You are not bad. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. But Edna worried. She worried that she had made the wrong choice in telling Grace the truth. She worried that she should have waited longer. She worried that Grace would be traumatized by this knowledge forever. Chioma tried to comfort her. There was no right answer, she said. Grace would have found out eventually. At least she heard it from you with love instead of from a stranger or a cruel classmate. And slowly, very slowly, Grace began to heal. But the journey was far from over. One day, about 6 months after learning the truth, Grace asked Edna, "Do you hate me because I look like him?" The question broke Edna's heart. "I could never hate you," Edna said fiercely. "Never. Yes, you look like your father. But when I look at you, I don't see him. I see you. I see my daughter. I see the person you're becoming. But you must think about him when you see me," Grace said. Edna couldn't lie. "Sometimes I do," she admitted. "But not in the way you think. When I look at you, I think about how you're different from him. How you're kind where he was cruel. How you're gentle where he was violent. You have his face, but you have my heart. And your grandmother's spirit." Grace seemed to find comfort in that. Over time, Grace developed a more nuanced understanding of her origins. She understood that she was conceived in violence, but that didn't make her violent. She understood that her father had done terrible things, but that didn't make her terrible. And as Grace grew older, she had to make her own choices about what her father's legacy meant for her life. When Grace turned 16, she asked Edna if she could read Mark's confession. "Are you sure?" Edna asked. It's very graphic. Very painful." "I need to know," Grace said. "I need to understand who he was. The whole truth, not just the parts you've told me." Edna hesitated but ultimately agreed. Grace was old enough. She had a right to know her own story. "I'm so sorry," Grace said. "I'm so sorry for what he did to you. To Grandma. To everyone. You have nothing to apologize for," Edna said. But I feel like I should, Grace said. I feel like I'm carrying his guilt. That's not yours to carry, Edna said firmly. His guilt died with him. You get to write your own story. Grace thought about that. What would Grandma Patricia think of me? She asked. Edna smiled through her tears. She would have loved you so much. She would have been so proud of the person you're becoming. Even though I'm his daughter? Grace asked. Especially because you're his daughter, Edna said. Because you prove that good can come from evil. That light can shine in darkness. That love is more powerful than hate. Those words became a mantra for both Edna and Grace. Love is more powerful than hate. But living that truth was harder than saying it. When Grace graduated from high school, she made an announcement that surprised everyone. I want to work with victims of violence, she said. I want to help people who have been through what you went through, Mom. I want to help children who, like me, are trying to figure out who they are when they come from trauma. Edna was amazed. Grace had taken the worst circumstances of her birth and decided to use them for good. Grace went to university and studied psychology and social work. She volunteered at women's shelters. She worked with children of incarcerated parents. She became an advocate for rape survivors and their children. I can't change where I came from, Grace told Edna. But I can change where I'm going. And I can help others on similar journeys. The trust fund Mark had set up paid for Grace's education. The blood money, as Edna had once called it, was being used to heal others. There was something profoundly redemptive about that. And Edna? She had her own journey of healing to complete. Edna continued therapy for years. She had to work through not just the trauma of that terrible night, but also the complicated feelings about Mark's return, his death, and her decision to allow him into Grace's life. Do you regret it? Her therapist asked one day. Letting him meet Grace? Edna thought about it carefully. I regret that it was necessary, she finally said. I regret that Grace's financial security came from him. But do I regret the actual decision? I don't know. Maybe someday I will. Maybe someday I won't. Right now, I'm just trying to live with it. That was the most honest answer she could give. Edna also had to learn to separate Grace from her trauma. For years, looking at Grace had been painful. Now she was learning to just see her daughter. Not as a reminder of violence, but as her own person. Grace is not what happened to me, Edna told her therapy group one day. Grace is what I chose to create from what happened to me. She's my reclamation of power. She's my refusal to let violence be the end of my story. That realization was powerful. But Edna's healing journey hit a major milestone when she finally visited her mother's grave with Grace. They went on what would have been Patricia's birthday. Edna brought flowers. Grace brought a letter she had written. At the grave, Edna spoke first. Mama, she said, her voice thick with tears. I'm sorry it took me so long to bring Grace here. I was ashamed. I thought you would be disappointed in me for letting him into our lives. For not getting justice the way I should have. He paused, crying. But I hope you understand. I hope you understand that I was trying to do what was best for Grace. I hope you understand that I did get justice in the end. Maybe not the justice I wanted, but justice nonetheless. Then it was Grace's turn. She knelt by the grave and read her letter. Dear Grandma Patricia, I never got to meet you, but Mom tells me about you all the time. He says I have your smile. I wish that were true. I wish I had your smile instead of his. But Mom says you would have loved me anyway. That you would have seen past where I came from and just seen who I am. I want you to know that I'm trying to be good. I'm trying to make choices that would make you proud. I'm trying to be the kind of person who brings light instead of darkness. I wish you could have met me. I wish my dad hadn't killed you. But since I can't change the past, I'm going to honor your memory by living a life of kindness and compassion. I love you, Grandma. Even though we never met. Love, Grace. Both Edna and Grace cried at that grave for a long time. But when they left, they felt lighter. Like they had finally closed a chapter that had been open for too long. Years have passed since Mark's death. Grace is now in her 20s, working as a therapist specializing in trauma. Edna has mostly healed, though she still has hard days. They've learned to talk about what happened. Not all the time, but when necessary. They don't let it define them, but they don't pretend it didn't happen either. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? Grace asked Edna recently. Edna thought about it. I don't know, she said honestly. I've forgiven him for some things. I've made peace with others. But full forgiveness. I don't know if that's possible. Or even necessary. Do you think I should forgive him? Grace asked. That's not for me to decide, Edna said. Forgiveness is personal. It's between you, him, and God. Whatever you decide, I support you. Grace nodded. I think I'm working toward forgiveness. Not for him, but for me. Because I don't want to carry hate in my heart. Edna smiled. Your grandmother would be so proud of you. So what's the answer? What should Edna have done? Should she have called the police immediately when Mark returned? Should she have rejected his offer and denied Grace the financial security he provided? Should she have told Grace the truth earlier? Later? Never? The truth is there's no right answer. Edna made the choices she thought were best with the information and emotions she had at the time. She tried to balance justice for her mother with mercy for a dying man. She tried to balance protecting Grace's innocence with being honest about their family's past. Were her choices perfect? No. Did she make mistakes? Probably. But she did the best she could in an impossible situation. And that's all any of us can do when faced with unthinkable circumstances. Edna's story reminds us that life isn't always about clear choices between good and evil. Sometimes we're forced to choose between different shades of gray. Sometimes, every option feels wrong. Sometimes there is no justice that feels just enough. But it also reminds us of the resilience of the human spirit. Edna survived unspeakable trauma and raised a remarkable daughter. Grace overcame the circumstances of her birth and became a force for healing in the world. And even Mark, as terrible as his actions were, experienced genuine remorse before he died. None of this excuses what happened. Nothing can bring Patricia back. Nothing can undo the violence and trauma. But it shows us that even in the darkest circumstances, there can be growth. There can be healing. There can be redemption, not for the perpetrator necessarily, but for the survivors. If you're facing an impossible decision in your own life, remember Edna's story. Remember that you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to make the perfect choice. You just have to make the best choice you can with the information you have, and then have the courage to live with that choice. And if you're struggling with trauma from your past, know this. You are not defined by what was done to you. You are defined by what you choose to do next. Your story isn't over. And like Edna and Grace, you have the power to write the next chapter. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please share it. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that they can survive their impossible situation too. And remember, love is more powerful than hate. Light is stronger than darkness. And hope is always possible even in the deepest pain. Take care of yourselves. And take care of each other.